As we wrap up this year, I'm so grateful for the storytellers, changemakers, and to you, the listeners, who make this podcast possible. And as a special thank you, I'm sharing the code THEPACKER200 for a special discount on registration for our upcoming East Coast Produce Expo. Here's to more conversations that inspire us in the new year. Welcome to the Packer Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Herrick, and I sit down with leaders and disruptors in the fresh produce industry who are reimagining how we grow, move, and deliver fresh fruits and vegetables in a changing world. And speaking of leaders and disruptors, I'm joined today by Steve Mantle, CEO and founder of Innovate Ag, and we're here to talk about ag tech. Thanks for joining me, Steve.
Christina, it's great to be here with you. We were last together down in Anaheim, and so we're reunited online.
Yes, and I don't think you can see it. I know I'm wearing lemons on my sweater, but the Team Blueberry headband is back there.
Hey, I love it. That's right. I saw you running that morning. Well done.
Yes. So, yeah. Well, I'm really excited to have you on. I've talked to you a few times. I think this is going to be a great conversation. And I think what's an interesting place to talk to you and to bring you into the conversation is to talk a little bit about some of, what inspired you to move into fresh produce and ag tech. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, as with anything, it starts with our childhood for all of us, right? And for me, I spent the first 10 years of my life in Australia, the land of infertility and pervasive drought challenges, and the need was really planted early in my life. We, at the age of 10, moved to Eastern Washington as a family. And as kids, many often will do, even though I worked on farms a bit as a kid, both in Australia and here. But I want to go to the big city and get away from it all. But life came around full circle eventually. Ended up in Seattle, spent a number of years in different tech firms. The last 12 years in high tech was at Microsoft, leading Azure Cloud's rapid scale up from 100 million to 10 billion plus yearly revenue, which that's a small number at this point, given how fast cloud has grown. It's mind blowing listening to the earnings results from Microsoft, Google, and so on. And so I sought a career that combined tech expertise with real world impact in ag, and I was drawn to the challenge of how do we make the data actionable that I was used to having actionable in terms of making M&A discussions and decisions and product decisions, and how do we apply that to specialty crop growers? So relocated to Walla Walla along the way to capitalize on the collab ag innovation out here and partnering with progressive growers.
So, I think what's interesting is I've had a lot of folks on the podcast or just talk to them that work in the ag tech space. And, I often think that technology and agriculture could be seen as very separate. Obviously, we're seeing innovation, we're seeing change, but I think there's a bridge there. But, I'd love to hear from you some of the surprises or things that you discovered while coming into this tech agriculture world from the tech side.
Well, first I would say I underestimated, as many uh, founders do in ag tech, how complex agriculture is. the, the layers upon layers of information growers process to make decision really just kind of blows me away. And I think back to 5 years ago, um, 6 years ago when we were getting started, and large language models weren't really out there. But I felt like with these leaders I was working with in the industry that I was working with large language models because they literally would have two phones, one on each ear, and one might be in Spanish and one's in English, and they're real, and everything's happening around them, and say blueberries or cherries. It was more cherries and apples I was working on at the time, and I was just blown away by all the decision making. Um, that surprised by the diversity. Each crop and region varies more than enterprise tech certainly would suggest. So local knowledge is vital. In software, we're used to repeatability and and the adaptability being very similar across the board and defining use cases, and boom, it just has a ripple effect. Not so much in farming. Every farm wants to do something slightly different and has different processes. And then the toughest one I think was realizing that the tech adoption pace is in farms is much slower than it is in pure tech and in B2C and B2B type scenario. So realizing that that pace depends on personal relationships and the value of field ready solutions, not just theoretical potential.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I've seen it firsthand. You think certain things, certain tech additions are going to make a huge difference, and it's a little bit of a slow crawl, and understandably, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of moving pieces and parts, and as you said, it's pretty easy to see how complicated or complex all of the farming operations are. And then we're not even talking about data yet, which what is what we're going to get to in just a minute. um I think it's kind of interesting to that you mentioned really a goal is to make data actionable, and I think
Mm.
that's really interesting. So let's talk about some of the technologies that are out there that are part of what you're trying to do to get growers to utilize to then make things actionable. So talk about that, and then talk about that need for actionability, I guess, is the word I'm gonna go with.
Well, I mean, the theme is we have to meet growers where they are over and over and over. And unfortunately, that repeatability can be somewhat challenging that goes along with that. So having the adaptability around that, tech providers often get so enamored around this big picture solution that they forget that for a grower, just a simple change can make a huge difference. And so, an example I can think of is I was recently down in California after IFPA's global produce show and traveling up to FIRA. And so, doing the trek through Central Valley, stopped at some growers, customers along the way. And one of those was a tomato grower. And they were first sat down with them and said, "Boy, hey, we love your solution, Fair Track, in terms of tracking labor and so on, and it's great. And we've got several contract labor companies, and use this across 1,000 plus people." And I said, "Well, great. I'm glad you're happy with it, but let's talk about other challenges that you have across the board." And it came down to like one key challenge was, well, he was kind of freaking out about a Cisco audit in a couple of days, and just having data. A lot of there was guesswork that was going to into that audit. Secondly, was we talked about quality, right? And so in this case, he said, "Well, we'd really like to be able to improve quality." He said, "Well, how are you tracking that today?" He said, "Well, we've got ladies that are down in the packing shed that take a couple of buckets out of each tractor trailer as it comes in, and then they categorize things based on insect damage and basically all the different reasons for culls. And then they're using a pencil and paper, literally on a clipboard, to mark that down. And then it goes over to a receptionist at the end of the day. And then when she comes in the morning, assuming she's not out sick, she'll input that into a spreadsheet. And eventually it ends up back feedback loop out into the field to the crew leads. At that point, they've probably already moved to a different field, and so the latent feedback not that helpful. So we said, well, what if we actually took our handheld devices that you're already using out in the field, equipped your ladies in the packing house with one of those, and they literally just touch screen based on counts of these different things that are coming in their buckets. And then they could actually get that real-time feedback. You bypass any steps along the way. You've now got a digital feedback loop for the guys that picked that trailer 2 hours before. And he's like, "Whoa, that'd be amazing." So, basically for like $3,000 or so, they're on the path to really having that feedback loop and improving the quality and differentiating that quality, and then even being able to tie it back into um, which field that actually tied to, right? And kind of what they need to be thinking about in terms of trends around, hey, when we're in this field and we've got this neighboring crop, we have more challenges with insects for damage, for example. And so looking at kind of those broader trends. So that's one. Another example is, say, with fair pick data, where it has so much potential beyond payroll incentives. So while that itself provides same year ROI, we've got a blueberry cherry grower that identified the 15% or so that aren't even of laborers that aren't covering their wages, their minimum wage. And that basically he's taking those 15%, they're moving them off to the side for retraining or allocation to other projects, and then asking everybody else to work another 10 minutes a day, that top 85%. And that identifies as about $4,500 a day in savings, and so that quickly adds up, obviously, in a month. And then finally, another example is where we're out as part of the Berry Smart Fields project with USHBC, US High Bush Blueberry Council, and we equipped fine field blueberry pickers, an automated harvester with cameras on the front, on the back, pointing down at the totes, and so it's literally showing what was on the bushes, the blueberry bushes, before the harvester went through, what's actually going into each tote while it's still out in the field, and then what's left on the blueberry bushes afterward, and then even what's on the ground afterward, which is something that some of the growers like Sakuma Brothers have been bugging me to do for ages. So bringing that all together is really key on making it actionable, and then being able to do something about it.
And I think that's really interesting. A couple things that I thought of as you were talking. One, you're right that there a lot of times it's important for growers to have data, and but I think a lot of times it's not just the grower that needs the data to improve their own operation. They're being asked to provide that data for audits, for things like that, for contract renewals. So having better data not
Mhm.
only helps improve the grower's operation, it also provides that information that's being needed for X, Y, and Z, which I think is interesting. And then two, I think it's also kind of understanding some of the other information that you can learn from that data. Like you were talking about blueberries on the field, and honestly, or on the ground, my mind immediately went to like IPM, pest control,
Yeah,
spotted wing, anything else that might be left over,
yes,
you
WB.
know.
Yep.
And so I'm thinking that like that too. And I think, I when I think of data, I don't think of like data in this term
Mhm.
of informing like pest control and things like that, pest mitigation strategies, but you it all goes into the same it all goes into the same operation. And so it's really interesting
Yeah.
to hear kind of some of those residual and ripple effects, as you said. And I know you gave some way better illustrations than the ones that I came to my mind. But just making, like you said, those incremental changes and the ripple effects that has moving forward, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's all about the layers of the data and thinking about the data in different ways, and it really comes down to your process management at the end of the day too, right? On being able to action on it.
So, I'm curious to hear, you work in so many different commodities. Um, Talk to me a little bit about, what you've learned from working in blueberries might inform cherries, or are they so different? Are you learning things in one commodity that can help growers of another commodity?
Yeah. Well, again, it really does come back to process management and understanding the different pieces. I remember a few years ago talking to Charlie with Burrow at I think it was World Ag Expo, or World Agritech it was actually, and said, "Charlie, you're not you don't have a robotics company." He looks at me like, yeah, I do." look what's beside me. And I said, well, no, you're about process optimization. And he said, you're right. That is at the end of the day what they're looking at. And so that's a theme across the board. Your challenges can vary by crop and geography, but all of your growers, they need better clarity and they need more confidence from their data. So adaptation of these different solutions is key. What works in apples could be different for blueberries or row crops, but the demand for trusted data is absolutely universal. And as tech providers, it's our responsibility to ensure that we understand the complexity of each crop and each region. Even the same crop, say blueberries up in Washington, very different than blueberries in New Jersey, which is like growing on a beach in New Jersey, right? Versus growing down in Florida versus growing down in Mexico or Peru. And that's just one crop. So we need to understand the complexities of each crop and region. Humility is key. It's going to find us if we don't have it, and it's going to beat us in a submission. And not going in arrogantly believing that what works in one place works in another, or that we have all the answers. Always be listening is really key, because back to the large language models of the growers, there's so much complexity and really earned wisdom, if you will, from all of the challenges that they've gone through over, frankly, decades.
Talking about data and growers, and I recognize I'm going to paint pretty broad strokes here, and I know for the growers that I've interacted with, there's a broad spectrum of both interest in technology, both interest in data and things like that.
Mhm.
But I feel like data can be a really broad, ambiguous, complicated word, and it can sound scary, right? I'm afraid of numbers. That's why I'm a writer, and that's why I'm doing this. Like, you don't see me, I will never be an accountant.
Well, keep doing what you're doing, Christina. That's good stuff.
So, how do you talk to growers? Some who maybe have a degree, maybe
Mm.
have some business, and then others, their business was what they learned on the farm. So, how do you get them on board with this data and understanding that they're going to find improvements and they're going to see those incremental benefits to better to having better data from the start. So how do you kind of talk to them about, like, if we improve this data, we're going to learn more and then you're going to be able to improve your business.
I think I go back to that tomato example where we were talking with the grower, and again, he was talking about how happy he was. He had some printer issues, some printers we work with, because printers are there's a printer hell out there. There's no question. But outside of that, he was very happy with the tech. And his we took the step back and thought about, well, what other challenges are you having in your broader operation, and like what's keeping you up at night? And then you unlock that as to, okay, well, how can what data points are out there, or could we actually collect, that actually would solve for that tossing and turning at night, or that stress? And that then gets, frankly, back to the answer. All of us have stress. It's really what is causing that stress, and then what could you find that might help? Just imagine what could unlock that stress. And I think that's the simple answer of unlocking the data. That's what we did at Microsoft, where we were looking at acquiring different companies. All right, hey, we've got a real challenge. We would often think through the lens of how we competing against Amazon and Google, and what are they doing, or what are we hearing from enterprise customers that we're not currently doing, that they're making decisions around. And so again, back to ag, quality is key. That ties into profitability. Often we'll hear people talk about, um, how do I keep people working or more productive more of the time? How do I make sure that they're not standing in line for different things, right? How to even just to kind of check out and check in, like how do we make their lives more simple? So it's just getting down in the brass tacks around pain points and challenges, and frankly, what's causing that compression in the chest and stress or tossing and turning.
I think that's a great point. And, I mean, I'm thinking personally as you're talking, and I'm like, well, sometimes that stress is self inflicted. Sometimes it's not. But if it's
Preach
self
it. Yeah.
inflicted, as you're doing those evaluations, you're able to see where an operation, again, to go back to the tomatoes, that just that simple fact that the information, that quality check is being delivered maybe 2 days late, a day late, way past its unfortunate usefulness. So you're able to speed that up and then learn so much more. So yeah, that's really interesting, and thank you for being a good sport, because like I said, I think there's growers of different uh, open-mindedness is not the word I want to use, but just different perspectives, right? There are growers that really love to integrate new technology and really see the value, and then there's other growers that go, oh, another thing I have to, just another
Because we've
thing
been
I have.
burned
Yeah.
often, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That, and like I said, I think when you say data, it's such a nebulous
it
word.
is.
What does that actually mean? And I
Mm,
think that's really the other thing is, it's much easier to see if you're automating XYZ, or you bring in a new piece of equipment and it changes your packing line, speed
mhm.
you up. That's a totally different thing than kind of evaluating some of this data. But that, I feel like we could have an entirely another podcast on. It's
Indeed.
just the value of data.
Yeah.
So we're talking about growers now. I want to have you talk to growers.
Okay.
So anyone tuning in that's on the grower side, if you're going to challenge them to turn data into nice to have into actionable, what's like the one thing? Like if you're going to challenge them, leave them with something to think about. What would be that thing you challenge them on?
Well, I would say back to what we were just talking about. Start by asking what problem do you have that you need to solve right now? And back to the tomato grower, it's happier solution until we dug in and asked what his broader pain points were. Equipping the front line workers and equipment with the ability to action and critically provide a real-time feedback loop, which it's a data stream in itself. And then really, it's important to collaborate closely between growers and researchers and tech innovators, but often we'll go to these research days and it's like, all right, yeah, but that's not going to apply to my field. So feedback really accelerates meaningful innovation. And so we've worked with USHBC on Very Smart Fields, and we've worked with Washington Tree Fruit Research Commission on smart orchards, where it brings together field days on in real world actual commercial farms where we're putting the different tech to work and some of it not to work where it falls apart, which is okay, and learning from it together.
That's really interesting. So I think we're kind of nearing the end of the either tough or easy questions. I always leave that up to the guest to decide if the meat of the conversation is the easy part, and then anyway. So I had kind of two thoughts, and I'm trying to simplify it into one. So you know obviously I'm doing a lot of stories on future of ag tech, future, which is again another great nebulous term, right? Like does the future mean 5 minutes from now? Does the future mean 5 months from now? Does it so I guess I'm kind of curious to find out from you, is there something again that you think growers should start paying attention to now, thinking about that future? And maybe this is a little bit further down the line. This isn't 5 months. This is, 5 years, 10 years. What should they be doing now that could set them up for, I don't want to say a brighter future, but we'll go with it, a brighter future, and really benefit them down the road.
I think back to one of the first deep, meaningful grower conversations. This was in row crops I had, and this grower pulled out this wooden box and was seriously weathered. And out of it, he pulls this compact iPack, which is like this pocket PC, tiny little thing. And then he has this GPS in it. And it was clear that this thing was like 20 years old, right? So, but this guy was a forward thinker. He was collecting data from from his environment, on soil, on weather. He had these massive spreadsheets that he worked on each winter, and so he thinking through and making sure that you're collecting data from the environment for your farm on soil, on weather, on labor, on your supply chain for holistic decision making and preparing for digital through digital record keeping now as opposed to back to that paper and pencil. um, Go digital and go to the point where it is accessible and make sure that the people that you are working with as providers are making that data available so that if they move on, you still have access to that data. And how good is that data that they're collecting? Is it usable? And then clearly kind of preparing for generative AI as well is really pretty key with having in a way that you can move it and then ask the AI tools for insights and then gut check it and then put it to work for you.
I think those are great points. And, you know, I we could go into a whole nother podcast, and I've talked about it before, but, you know, I always think when you're talking record keeping and
Mm.
actionable, accessible data, I'm also thinking about like FISMA 204 and some
Mm.
of the traceability information that growers are going to need to provide. And not just growers, all steps along the way, you know, till it reaches the consumer. And that's information that a lot of retailers want now. So, you know, I think that's a great point. I got to say though, when you started your story and we're talking about a wooden box, I honestly thought you were going to be talking about like paperwork in a wooden box, which would not probably surprise either one of us.
Yeah, no, I've definitely come across that. We've all come across that as well. Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a great place to end and kind of go into either, like I said, some of the fun or hard questions. You know,
Oh
I feel
boy.
like I could talk to you for longer. So, you know, I've got to bring you back on the podcast in a few months and maybe talk about some new things that are going on or some things that you've learned. But before I leave, you got to do the fresh take questions. So,
All right, I'm
um,
holding on for dear life here. What do we got?
yeah. So, okay, what's something that someone would be surprised to learn about you?
Uh, I don't have an accent, or at least it's all relative depending on where you're listening from, but I certainly have more of an American accent. However, I'm Australian by birth, and my grandparents were biologists, and my grandfather focused on national food security in Australia.
Yeah, that's true. You know, as you were talking about kind of your background in the beginning there, I thought, yeah, I don't hear an accent, but you know, that's
It's not there.
interesting. That's okay. You know, you
Long
could say
gone.
you type with an accent, right? I don't know.
That's it. That's it. Sure.
So if you weren't doing what you're doing now, and I realize you've worn a couple different hats, but
Yeah.
what's a dream job for you?
Well, frankly, I love doing what I do now. But if you could take away having to deal with fundraising, I love our existing investors, but I do not love going out and doing fundraising. So that would be that's my dream job.
All right, well, good answer. And you know, and not that I've done any fundraising for an actual entity. You know, I've just done it for different charities, and
Yeah.
it's not easy.
Right.
Again,
It's
I've learned one, I will never really be good at sales, and two, I will never be good at accounting. So, you know, the couple things that our listeners and viewers have learned about me today. Okay, so next question. What's a random topic? And I'm going to hope you stay out of fresh produce with this, not related to fresh produce, that you could give a passionate TED talk about. Is there something?
well, that's a tough one because everything ultimately ties to fresh produce. But
I guess
I
I was thinking like a TV. Are you like a fan of a TV series? Like I'm thinking like movie. I hate to like tip the hand a little bit. That's what I was thinking, like something, you know, cars. I don't know.
I on a passionate TED talk on I think really just being authentic to yourself and just keep getting up. So maybe that's in I enjoy downhill skiing. That includes being authentic as to can I actually do this on the diamond run, but and then just letting the stress kind of go and realize that everybody else is going through different pieces of this. So being authentic to yourself and sharing with others helps unlock, if you will, insights from others and relatability from others in their respective journey as well.
I can see that, and I think that's a good one. It's adjacent to fresh produce, but it's also some of those more TED talks that are a little bit more like, I don't want to say personal development. We'll say that
Okay,
that's you could do with self help or a personal development
that's it.
TED talk.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right, here's another one. Outside of fresh produce, what is something wildly underrated outside of fresh produce that you think more people should be paying attention to?
Well, it's the next generation. It's our kids. It's our college students. How do we pay it forward to the next generation to help them navigate some of the unaffordability challenges that we didn't have to face as much at that same age? And with this AI around us, maintaining critical thinking despite AI and really um, that's just a critical piece, right? Thinking outside the box and really being able to do that deep critical thinking, and not using AI as too much of a crutch where we lose that as the next generation.
I think that's a good point. And I will definitely age myself here by saying I was a millennial and I've been the butt of so many jokes. I can't tell you how many presentations I would be in, and fresh produce presentations, apple grower presentations, and they would talk about millennials being so out of touch and just and I hate to say, I mean, with some of the slang of Gen Alpha, I might be one of those people that goes, what 6'7"? What is 6'7"? I don't understand this. And I think to your point though, instead of us being quick to dismiss some of these things, we need to understand. I mean, there at some point they're going to be the lion's share of produce buyers. They're going to be the lion's share of the
Mhm.
workforce. So instead of us dismissing and going, oh, stupid millennial or whatever, we've got to be able to help them because we've been that generation that's been the one that's looked at as they're the hooligans, they're the youngins, they don't know anything, and that's obviously not the case. We've all found our way, so but
They love the retro though, right? Retro is back. Watch out flip phones, watch out LPs, watch out 35 millimeter cameras. That's crazy.
so it's kind of funny. So we have a whole conversation about technology, and we're gonna go 10 steps forward and take a few steps back.
What a wrap, Christina. What
Yeah.
a wrap.
Well, thank you. I hope those were fun. I always like having the end of the conversation be a little bit of these fun questions because you literally never know what someone's going to say until you start them. So I've enjoyed having you on.
It's been a lot of fun having this conversation and getting to know you a little better along the way, and thanks for making the time.
Steve, I've enjoyed having you on. Thank you so much for the time. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully you won't be a stranger and you'll come back.
Christina, it's been great doing this in person up in Anaheim and then doing this online, and it's great talking with your audience today.
Absolutely. And speaking of audience, thanks to everyone for tuning in. And don't forget, if you like what you see and hear, you can catch new episodes of the podcast. And we'd also love it if you go on your favorite podcast platform, rate us, give us 5 stars, tell us you love the show. Um, and thanks for tuning in and for all you do to keep fresh produce moving from field to table.